When people hear the words naval blockade, most assume it's about one country. One crisis, one headline? But that's not really what makes Trump's statement about Venezuela. So important Venezuela itself almost feels secondary here. Because in terms of military power, in terms of economic power, it cannot be compared to the strength, to the power of the United States. What actually matters is the signal being sent. Because this isn't just a threat that is aimed at Caracas, this may be a glimpse of where global politics is heading next. For generations, a naval blockade was treated as something close to unthinkable. You would agree in the 20th century. It was viewed as an extreme step, basically a declaration of war, and for a good reason. A blockade doesn't need boots on the ground. There is no occupation, no long-term deployment of troops, no images of tanks rolling through cities. But what it does do is choke off a country's lifeline. Modern states survive on trade. They survive on imports-exports, energy flows, and shipping lanes. And if you cut those, the damage can be enormous. Imposing a blockade is an extreme form of aggressive, posturing toward a foreign state. It shouldn't be downplayed. It shouldn't be dismissed. And it has consequences too. It does have consequences. Many consequences for the target state, such as economic and civilian suffering, as well as for the government that chooses to impose a blockade. Because the international community takes note of it. That's why blockades were considered so dangerous. They look clean on paper, but in reality, they hit civilians, they hit economies, and they hit entire societies. Which is also why international law is very clear on this. If you do some basic Googling, do some basic Google search, find out what international law says about the blockade. And you will know that under the UN definition of aggression, blockading a country's ports or coastline, for that matter, with armed forces is quite plainly an act of aggression. In theory, that should trigger outrage. It should trigger global outrage. It should trigger global condemnation. And it should trigger sanctions. In theory, but in practice, that's not how things work. We know that very well in practice. Of course, we all know how it works. When powerful countries do it, the rules suddenly become flexible. The same people who demand strict adherence to international law, in some cases, go very quiet in others. This is different becomes the unspoken rule. Rules for thee, but not for me, in other words.